This episode was co-produced by Holy Code, your go-to partner for all software development needs. From proof of concept to highly complex software, to building nearshore teams or delivering the optimal ERP solution, Holy Code is what you need. They're experts in startup development and have helped many of our former guests supercharge their technology and make the world a better place, one line of code at a time. So if you're looking for support with scaling your tech product, head over to holycode.com and get started today. That's holycode.com.
We have a lot of amazing, talented folks in the company. We have a lot of ideas floating around. It's really having as a corporate culture that we're going to devote a certain percentage of our time to protecting what we create. And that's difficult to do in a startup because, every one day that you don't use to create your product to do IP development is one day that you've lost in, improving your product. So it's the trade-off between, creating an amazing product and protecting it.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Raffaello, a warm welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
You're the co-founder and CEO at Verity, a startup offering a complete integrated inventory tracking system powered by self-flying drones. That's a really cool pitch that you have right there. But before we talk about that, I actually want to talk about your background. You got your PhD in electrical engineering from Caltech in '97, and then you went on to teach at Cornell. And I was just wondering, what motivated you to then start your first startup in 2003?
Yeah, so I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I think to be a professor, you have to be an entrepreneur entrepreneur of ideas, new ideas. And so I was a professor at Cornell University for 5-6 years. I got tenure. I was at MIT doing my sabbatical, and I met an entrepreneur, Mick Mounts, who was trying to use mobile robots to do something really cool, revolutionize distribution facilities. And we really hit it off, and I quit my sabbatical and I joined him, and we founded Kiva along with Pete Werman.
Was that a difficult decision to leave your professor's salary and your job there basically to switch to starting your own company?
No, I was on sabbatical, right? So I had that year off to do whatever I wanted to do with. So, of course, took a huge pay cut, but obviously I'm very Swiss in my mentality. You just save. You save money, and when an opportunity comes, you can use that money to take advantage of it.
Right. But still, you did have to make that decision, right? To say, hey, I go down the entrepreneurial route, or I go back to university or back to research, whatever you would have wanted to do. How did you decide that it was worth it to give up your sort of academic career and then decide, okay, I go all in and really focus on this venture?
Yeah, it was, it's funny when I try to think back on it, it never seemed like a tough decision. It was just like an obvious decision that, I had developed all of this expertise as a professor. I had run a large program in systems engineering program of creating intelligent mechatronic systems. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that later, about the RoboCup competition. But it only seemed natural to me that the next stage was to take, these capabilities we had created. We had won this global competition 5 times, to take it to the next level, which was to create a company using those ideas and technology. So it just seemed like the natural next step.
I love that, because from the outside, it looks like a huge decision, a very difficult decision. But for you, it was just a logical next step.
That's right.
And so you then went on with 2 co-founders. You built Kiva Systems, an automated warehouse storage and retrieval system. And fast forward, that got acquired by Amazon in 2012. Why did you decide to sell the company?
Yeah, well, it's never a person's decision, right? So, the founders were ambivalent about the sale. Obviously, it was, Amazon buying us, which is great. The price they were paying at the time, the multiple was great. So everything was good from a purely financial perspective. We were ambivalent because we knew that there was a lot more upside that could be had, and we were enjoying what we were doing. But the other investors felt, this was a good exit, and that's why it happened. In hindsight, I'm actually ecstatic at the outcome. I mean, Amazon bought Kiva and made it central to their automation ambitions. They rebranded it as Amazon Robotics. There's over 500,000 of our mobile robots running around in warehouses, still running the code that I created for them. It's been a huge success. And, the downside is, maybe we could have held on and had a much bigger exit, but I frankly don't care.
Was that also, in that sense, the logical next step to then exit the company, like it was to, go from professor to start a company?
For me, it was. For me, basically, I wanted to create something that was, that had impact. And the sooner somebody like Amazon can take over it and really make it flourish, then I can go and do something else.
Absolutely. And you did that not long after. In 2014, you then founded Verity, your current startup. And Verity seems to sort of continue the work of Kiva systems, at least from an untrained eye like mine from the outside. So where would you say lies the difference between the two companies?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly similarities. The similarities are that, both operate in the logistics space, which, is a booming space. So that's a good thing to be in. It's B2B. They both rely on having fully autonomous solutions, fully autonomous mobile robots, fully autonomous flying robots. So that's the similarities. I think then the differences are that in Kiva, we move stuff around, whereas with Verity, we just collect information. I think that's a major difference. One other difference is that Kiva was relatively, heavy on hardware, mobile robots lifting up to, a ton, whereas with Verity, the hardware piece is actually quite small, both in terms of the size, the drones are small, both in terms of the cost of goods, the cost of our solution. The hardware is actually a very small piece of it. So they also differ in that way. Our Verity looks much more like a software subscription than Kiva, which was very sort of mobile robots moving stuff around.
Was that also something that, again, was like a logical next step that you said, hey, we've done hardware, so now it's time to go in more into the software angle?
It wasn't like that, because Kiva had a huge amount of hardware and software. And Verity has a huge amount of hardware and software know-how and IP. It's just that the size of the hardware is small. So the advantage of that model with Verity is that our costs are not largely due to the hardware. And that's why we have, good profit margins, and the business looks more like a software business, but it could not be done without this crucial hardware capabilities.
Right. And today we do this interview. You're sitting in Switzerland. You already came back to the ETH in Zurich, where you then were teaching there in 2008. So I was wondering, what brought you from the United States to Switzerland?
Yeah, I mean, so first, from a kind of professional perspective, Kiva had been going on for about 5 years. The part that I was responsible for, I was the co-CTO, was really to create the whole motion platform that Kiva is based on. I had hired many of my former students, many of them Cornell students, PhD students, undergraduates, master students, again, in this RoboCup competition. And I felt that it was in good hands and I could go off and do something else. I had been talking to various colleagues at ETH for quite some time, starting in early 2000s, in particular, Lino Guzzella and Manfred Morari. Lino, of course, is the former president of ETH. Obviously, it happened afterwards. The more I learned about ETH, the more I realized this is an amazing place to do research. So when I wanted to go back to academia in 2008 and restart the research that I put on hold to do Kiva, which was flying machines. I've been doing flying machines for 25 years. I felt that ETH was the perfect spot to do it. So I came here, I founded the Flying Machine Arena, built a large group around it, definitely an amazing professional decision that I made. There's also personal reasons. I was born in northern Italy, so I have most of my family is in Europe. I feel very European, the just even the geography. I love the mountains, the nature. I love hiking. I love outdoor activities, and I actually have to say I love, the Swiss mentality, how they view, infrastructure, laws, order. This is a great place to start a business. I just really love Switzerland.
In what way, if you compare that to the United States, what can we sort of learn from the United States?
Exactly. I love the United States as well. I mean, I'm Italian, Canadian, American, and Swiss. That's the way I think of myself. I lived in Italy until I was 10, in Canada from 10 to 24, and then the United States from 24 to 40. And here I've been here for 15 years. I think it's good to take the best out of everything. I mean, I think all of those places have amazing strengths, and Switzerland has amazing strengths. I would say that maybe if I was in my mid-20s, I might have found Switzerland a little bit boring, but I moved here in my 40s, and boring is good.
Stability and good life quality also, absolutely. So then you co-founded your new venture in 2014, Verity, with Marcus Henn and Marcus Weibel. Have you met them at ETH, or where have you met your co-founders?
Yeah, so Marcus Weibel got his PhD at EPFL, and he was running a large program in my group. He was a postdoctoral researcher in my group, running something called RoboEarth. It was basically the first version of cloud robotics. We started that in 2009 with some other partners. So he was running that, and we would always talk. He had also very entrepreneurial spirit. He had already founded a startup, a robotics startup that was really about communications in the robotics space. So we always talked about entrepreneurial ideas, and we hit it off. We got along really well. And then the other person is Marcus Henn, who was a PhD student in my group. Brilliant person, just amazing theoretically, amazing experimentally. Amazing communicator, just like a spectacular individual. And 2014, I was starting my sabbatical, and Marcus and Marcus were both excited about commercializing what we had developed, the capabilities. So we started Verity back then.
And how do you split the roles amongst your three co-founders?
Yeah, so I mean, we just view ourselves as everyone else in the company. We're part of the management team. So you split. When you're a startup company, one of the nice things about it is that you don't have to have fixed titles. What you have is capabilities, and people fill in to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. I would say, broadly speaking, Marcus Henn is our CTO, although I'm very involved in technical things as well. Marcus Weibel is COO. He basically makes sure that things are operating properly, but he's also basically our best salesperson. He owns the account with IKEA, which is our biggest client. So, he's, in that sense, he's also kind of head of sales, although we do have a, head of business development. So everybody fills in. I'm the CEO. I guess I view myself as the person that just makes sure that we're all aligned. That's my job. If I have to tell anybody what to do, then that's bad. A CEO shouldn't have to tell people what to do. My job is to make sure we're all aligned. Sometimes I have to make decisions that, when we have competing, obviously it's zero sum in many ways. We have limited resources. So someone that understands the business best has to make sure that we make those tough decisions. And I'm also very much engaged in the fundraising part of things.
That makes sense. Sounds like a really good team in terms of how you split the roles and how you complement each other. So let's talk a bit about your solution. Before we do so, what are some of the benefits of actually implementing and using an automated inventory checks?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually very simple to state. There are two main benefits. The first one is that you are automating a task which is done now manually, which is extremely inefficient. You have people that go at heights, 50 meters sometimes, to go and check to see that things are where they're supposed to be. So it's done manually. It's very inefficient. It's dangerous. It's a job that people hate to do. This is a typical benefit of automation, right? Replace something that people do that is just a horrible job done inefficiently. What's interesting about our solution is that there's a second benefit, which is the following. By collecting, the marginal cost of our solution is small, which means that you can collect data and information 20 times more frequently than you used to at very small extra cost. The benefit of that is that you can drive the errors in your warehouse down to zero. And that unlocks a huge amount of benefits. Like, for example, you have reduced lost sales, you have reduced stockouts, you're improving productivity because people don't have to hunt around for things when they need them. So that is a huge amount of savings. And that's atypical in automation solutions. Usually you just replace something. Here, you replace it, but you do it 20 times more often than you used to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if you do the whole process manually, you always have quite, I guess, like 3-4% error quote, right?
Exactly it. That's exactly it. And people have kind of gotten used to the fact that, hey, we live with this 2 or 3% error, and that's just the cost of doing business. It doesn't cross their minds that they should try to reduce it, because say, how are we going to reduce it? We have to then do more of this manual scanning. That's just way too painful. Let's just live with it. And that was part of the challenges in our business cases, to educate people to say, you should be scanning 20 times more often than you do. And they would say, what? And then once they get it, then they go, oh my God, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm. And once you free up the warehouse employees' time from doing these tasks, what else can they focus on? Can they like ship more orders, or how is that restructuring then working? What do they do if you take away this big chunk of work from them?
Yeah. So this is the wonderful thing about this task that we're replacing. It's a task that people hate to do. And most companies don't have dedicated people to do it. What they do is they get everybody in the company to basically chip in to do this. There's at year end, when you have to do like an annual inventory check, it's kind of all hands on deck. Everyone, get the secretary here. We got to do this, right? So it's extra work that people hate to do. A lot of times it's done on weekends. We talked to the folks at IKEA. Switzerland was where we kind of rolled out our solution in 2021. The employees are so happy that they don't have to do this task anymore. So it basically frees them up to do other things. This was an extra task that they had to do. There's very few places that have dedicated people that just do inventory.
I can heavily relate to that. My parents, they ran a veterinary practice, and once a year they had to do the manual inventory. They hated it as well. It was always long nights. So that, for an SME compared to a big business, that must be a really, really big task that people don't like. I also wonder, with the drones that come into play here, how does the exact process look like? How do you use and leverage the drones to actually get to that error-free inventory?
It's actually very straightforward. So we synchronize our solution, the Verity solution, which lives in the cloud, with our client's warehouse management system. So we just get excerpts whenever things move in the warehouse. We get information from the WMS, the client's warehouse management system, that just tells us, hey, this is there now. We've taken this pallet out, etc. So we basically have knowledge of where everything should be. Then at the end of the day, we take all of this information and we figure out, using proprietary algorithms, what is most likely to have errors. And then we create missions for the drones that are sitting on chargers. It's fully autonomous. And then they execute all of these missions and they collect data. They go and check to make sure that what the WMS thinks is there is actually there. And this is where the errors are uncovered. So it's a combination of checking things that, well, at the end of the day, it boils down to check things that are most likely to have errors. And there are many things that go into determining what is most likely to have errors.
Right. That sounds amazing. Like, really, really cool. And you don't only use the drones for the warehouse work. We also find your gadgets hovering around Celine Dion. Can you tell us a bit more about what happened there?
Yeah. So, this is an interesting it's, every startup is unique, right? And we're definitely unique in some ways and similar in others. But the way we're unique is the way that we initially monetized our capabilities. As we talked about, we founded the company in 2014. We came out of stealth mode in 2016 when we flew autonomous drones over the audience at TED. And that was about 2-3 months before we went live on Broadway with Cirque du Soleil with drones dressed as lampshades that did 400 shows, flying over performers, fully automated, not used by us, but by they're called carpenters, the folks that work on Broadway. So basically, we were able to monetize our autonomous drone capabilities in the live events space. So we've done tours with Metallica, Celine Dion, Drake. We're on 10 cruise ships globally. We're in many theatrical productions. We've done many one-time events. We have the world record for the most number of autonomous indoor drones. We did this with British Telecom back in 2019. And this allowed us to monetize our capabilities while in the background, we were creating this warehouse solution that is basically, has taken a long time to create because it's really difficult to create fully autonomous flying things.
Wow. Was that then ever a plan or even an option to stay on the event track and say, hey, this is where you can monetize? Or was that really just a means to an end to say, we need that to fund our operations into development, but that's not the ultimate goal or space where we want to stay?
I'd say it's a combination of it. We were excited about the live events business. It was a growing business and we put the resources to grow it. But at the same time, we realized that, the warehousing space is much, much bigger than the live event space. We did our first proof of concept in a Walmart warehouse in 2016. So we've been thinking about this warehousing space for a long, long time. And part of this POC, we realized that, there's so many things we need to do to get it to the level where we can just put it in a warehouse and leave it. And that's what we did, over the next 5 years until we rolled out our solution in 2021. But live events is still, a part of what we do. We have a small team that is dedicated to doing live events. It's a great business. It's a great high margin business. People are excited about it at Verity. When we onboard people and we do, a demo of our live events show, they think this is a cool company to work at. Part of our culture where failure is not an option comes from doing live events. When Celine Dion goes on stage and she does her encore, her signature song from the theme from the Titanic, and a drone takes off from her hand and she has a swarm of 100 of them. It's got to work, right? Like there's a whole show put around this finale, so it's in our DNA, right? So it's part of who we are.
Is that sometimes also a challenge that you still have sort of both use cases, the warehouse inventory application, but also the live shows and the events? Because I imagine you probably have to sell that quite differently. It's a completely different sales pitch.
Yeah. So basically the live events part, we basically do, it's not something that we actively go and sell. It's basically word of mouth. People know in the business that if they want to get this done and get it done properly, they come and talk to us, right? So we really don't do any outreach. It all comes to us, and we're fine with that because it's a small niche, high margin, extreme. It's a very Swiss, business, right? Like we're doing something that no one else can do, and it's modest, but it's a good business.
Absolutely, yeah. You would leave money on the table if you didn't do it, basically.
That's correct. That we'd leave money on the table if we didn't do it. It's not a lot of money, but it's money on the table. And it's also just the culture part of it. Like people are just so excited about working at a company that gets to rub shoulders with, the guys in Metallica or, Justin Bieber, the younger crowd. I actually like Justin. I think he's cool.
Amazing. And talking about client acquisition, how do you acquire new clients for the inventory, for the warehouse inventory solution?
Yeah, I think this is the standard play in in automation solutions. You go to trade shows, you get your name out, you make sure that you appear in trade magazines. We have we do a lot of things in LinkedIn. That's something that's very different than Kiva days. LinkedIn is a great platform for reaching the right people that could be potential buyers of your solution. We like to deal with folks at all levels of a company. So we definitely want to make sure that we connect. Usually the starting point when the things was in its infancy was with innovation folks. So basically the innovation folks are the ones that you first interact with. We're kind of beyond that stage now. We really work directly with folks that run specific warehouses, but more often than not, than people that sit above them that are responsible for operations across their whole network. And we like to work with those folks because then you have buy-in from the top and buy-in from the individual warehouses.
Got it. And for you to acquire clients in an international setting, how do you go about that? You are based in Switzerland. However, I imagine your clients can probably be all over the world, especially also in the US. How do you expand to these markets as a Swiss company? Is that sometimes a challenge, or is that easier than expected?
Well, so we do have a U.S. entity, and we have U.S. employees all in the commercialization team. And, it's actually, we have some amazing people in the commercialization team. As long as they stay in contact with mothership, they fly back often to make sure that, culture alignment, making sure that, everybody knows each other. It's super important that you have physical contact. It doesn't have to be once a week, right? But, every couple of months, have these folks come back. So it's worked out well.
And, we heard about the USPs. You're much better at doing the inventory. You help to reduce errors to basically make it error free. Another USP of yours is you also help to reduce CO2 emissions. First of all, how do you exactly do that? And second, how important is that in a sales pitch for companies these days?
Yeah. So, there's two ways in which we do it. The first is kind of what is, again, it's the obvious thing, which is do the thing more efficiently. We can do our task in complete darkness. So we don't need the lights on to do inventory checks. So that helps. You eliminate the use of scissor lifts and forklifts to go and do this inspection. And those things, consume quite a bit of power, which ultimately results in CO2 emissions. Just doing things that are more efficient, improve productivity. That's kind of the one part of it. It's actually not the biggest chunk. The biggest chunk is the reduction in waste. Because you're reducing your errors, it means that you have less stuff that finds itself in a landfill, that has to be recycled, that spoils. There's just less waste. And waste actually is a big contributor to CO2 emissions. So a big part of our CO2 impact is just simply reducing errors, which means reducing waste. How important is that to clients? It's very important. Folks, want to be good citizens. We can get into a philosophical debate about, why they do it. You could say it's cynical. It's just simply because they know that their clients want to hear. Then that's fine. It's great. Young people are very idealistic. And I think it's great that they kind of speak with their wallets. And if they get wind that a company is not being a good citizen, then they'll stop, having them as their client, which I think is great, puts pressure on them. And I've personally met executives at big companies that really want to do the right thing. They have families and they know that they seize this opportunity. They know that their clients want it. They want to do it. It's the right thing. So they double down on it. So there's a lot of doubling down on it. So I think it's great. I just hope this upcoming recession that we're all hearing about doesn't impact that.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. And another thing, we heard about your career in academia, and Verity also has itself over 100 patents in its own name. So what's the most challenging aspect of the whole patenting process?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Finding the time to do it.
Well, okay.
We have a lot of amazing, talented folks in the company. We have a lot of ideas floating around. It's really having as a corporate culture that we're going to devote a certain percentage of our time to protecting what we create. And that's difficult to do in a startup because, every one day that you don't use to create your product to do IP development is one day that you've lost in, improving your product. So it's the trade-off between, creating an amazing product and protecting it.
Yeah, I like that. It's protecting versus creating. That's a great way to put it. Because your setup is quite also, a combination of hardware and software. So that's unique. But at the same time, I imagine that to be also very challenging because often people say do hardware or software, but don't do both at the same time because it's immensely complex. You have a lot of experience in that space of combining the two, basically. How complex is that for you? Is that a challenge to have both systems, hardware and software, running in sync, so to speak?
To be honest with you, I don't know if it's a challenge simply because that's all I've ever done in my life. I've always done both. I don't think of myself as a hardware person. I don't think of myself as a software person. I think of myself as a systems person. Yeah, I solve systems problems that involve a lot of software because they have a lot of intelligence, a lot of algorithmic intelligence. For all the things that I've done, I'm interested in motion. So that kind of naturally ties the hardware with the software. what's interesting from a commercialization perspective is that this gives you a huge competitive advantage. Folks that are system integrators that take existing hardware and try to put software on top of it, especially when it moves, very difficult to do. You can count the successes. In fact, I don't even know what the successes are that do that, frankly. If you look at all robotics companies that have been successful, they're all vertically integrated.
So you basically, you have your moat right there. You don't even need the patents.
That's right. That's right. That's correct. It's a big part of it. And frankly, this is always why it's a difficult decision to make. IP is super important. Not as a startup to protect yourself if somebody wants to, because are you going to hire lawyers? It's going to be your best remedy against competitors is not your patents. It's just to stay ahead of them. IP is super important for if you're going to IPO or if you're going to be acquired, because then it's a different story. When Amazon looked at Kiva's patent portfolio and they said, wow, this is amazing, with our might behind it, this is super valuable. That's why you want to have IP.
That makes sense. Yeah. And we briefly talked about why you are in Switzerland today. Your company's also in Switzerland. The headquarters are here. You have the US entity, but still it could have been an option, back then when you founded the company to say, okay, we go back to the US. Why is Switzerland the right home base for Verity?
I mean, I think Switzerland is I want to say the best because it's always hard to say the best, but it has to be one of the top 3 places in the world to start a business, a high-tech business like ours. So first of all, we have, a great, very stable government, very, stable laws. The rules are relatively straightforward. It's very efficient. It's not difficult to start a company, number one. Number two, we have amazing tech talent here in Switzerland. We have ETH just around the corner, where it's a great source of technical talent. The work ethic here is good. People here like to work. They also have balance in their life, which is great, which in my opinion makes them even better employees. Folks that don't just spend 100 hours a week working, but spend, the 40 to 50 hours a week, but then have balance in their life, it makes them more productive. So I think we have great balance here in Switzerland. Part of it is everything is efficient here. So people are more productive. This is a land of amazing productivity. People like moving to Switzerland, especially from Europe. It's a great place to recruit and bring people here. People say, well, the downside, of course, is that wages are high here, but we're not doing low margin stuff. We're doing high margin. We're a high margin business. There's a lot of intellectual property. So it's perfectly fine to have, high wages because people are creating super high value. So I think Switzerland for high tech, for robotics, it's an amazing place.
Are there also things that we can improve? If so, what are the most important things that we should improve in Switzerland from an entrepreneurial startup perspective?
Yeah, so I think less of it is the getting access to technical talent. I think that's amazing. I think a big part of it is what do I think is super strong in the United States? There's a very strong connection between folks that are business minded and folks that are technically minded. There's just a lot of overlap and networking that tries to match these folks together. It's kind of what happened with me and Kiva, with Mick and Pete. I think also from an investment perspective, I think that there's a lot of appetite, or, let's put aside this year, which has been very difficult, but historically, let's look at the last 15 years. There's been a lot of appetite in the US to fund companies, not just at the seed level, and not just at the C level where the risk has been, largely mitigated for, but kind of in that A-B range, which traditionally has been difficult here in Switzerland, right? Is going beyond the seed stage. This is why a lot of Swiss companies traditionally in the tech space get bought out when they're like 5 or 6 people, because they're a bargain relative to what they would be if they were in the US, where they would have an ability to raise an A and a B round. Here, less so traditionally, so they get scooped up by Google, IBM, Facebook, etc. So I think that's one of the things that the US and Israel has done really well, which I think, but Switzerland is very different now than it was even 5 years ago. There's a lot more appetite for these A and B rounds here in Switzerland.
You mentioned fundraising before as a challenge or an environment that we can improve in Switzerland. And you said also before, when you were looking at the patents, it was about creating versus protecting. So with fundraising in the current environment, it's very much about growth versus profitability. How do you see that for your company? I know you're in a high margin business. What is your focus? You want to grow, or you want a stronger focus on profitability?
Yeah, so I think right now we globally, I think you have to focus on profitability. I think, and the reason being is that everyone else is doing it, so you should do it as well. We've seen several of our competitors not able to secure funding, so they're basically dissolving. So we actually have less competition now than we did a year ago, right? So there's less of a hurry to grow and grow and grow, rather to focus on profitability. So you have to adapt to the environment, and the environment is telling us that, hey, let's focus on profitability at the expense of super high growth, and that's perfectly fine. I think that's a good thing. We have the luxury to do it, it's also, I think when you're always focused on growth, you kind of lose touch with, hey, I want to. I want to become profitable. So I think it's good to have these global mindsets change.
Does that also change anything? You have raised 80 million Swiss francs so far as funds for your company. Does it also change in any way how you spend your money? Like, did you make any changes due to the change in fundraising environment out there?
I mean, I think it's really about how quickly we grow the company, right? The folks that we hire. So it's basically making sure that we focus our efforts on profitability at the expense of long-term things that we know we want to do, but we can kick the can down the road. We don't have to do them now. A lot of it has to do with product development. Obviously we're not doing layoffs, we're not downsizing Verity, but we're also not growing it as aggressively as we would if the environment was different. So it's just simply being less oriented on growing and more on profitability.
So you already said IKEA is your biggest customer. You have some other very well-known customers like Maersk or Samsung, and you also have operations worldwide. So we wonder what is next for you. Is the plan also an acquisition like last time, or even an IPO maybe?
To me, what we focus on is, let's make this company as the best company that we can. The biggest focus right now is to get us to, profitability and scaling, right? So right now, our focus is scaling the company, being profitable, maintaining our leaders, being leaders in the space, and just scaling the business. And then all the other stuff kind of falls out of that, whether it's an acquisition, whether it's an IPO, all of that stuff kind of takes care of itself. Historically, most robotics companies get bought, right? So the chance of being acquired is probably high, although things, the environment changes. I think we'll be we could IPO in about 2 years if we wanted to. So I think all of those options are there.
And I like you said get bought, so they don't get sold. I think that's a very important differentiator. You build a successful company, and then eventually the outcome will that you will get bought. But selling is not the goal per se. A successful company is the goal.
That's right. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct.
So, Raf, to wrap up the conversation today, we also have some rapid fire questions for you. I either give you a short question or different options to choose from, and you have to answer in one sentence.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Let's go. What's your favorite Verity drone?
That would be our industrial drone.
What's your favorite non-drone gadget?
I hate gadgets.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Where do you have your eureka moments?
When I'm hiking in the mountains.
Nice. And in that regard, lake or mountains?
Mountains.
And the last one, Switzerland or the United States?
Switzerland.
That's a clear choice for you these days.
Yes.
Great. Raf, thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your impressive story. It was a pleasure talking to you. Lots of success and all the best with Verity and whatever you're building and tackling with your teams.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sylvan. I enjoyed the conversation.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.